Welcome back to Drive Home Reviews meets Abbott and Costello. I know it's been a little while since I've been here, but I'm back, and so are the boys. I really wish I had a better segue this time. Usually I like to start the things off. I've been teaching speech and communication this year, along with my regular theater instruction duties, and so I've become obsessed with this concept of the attention getter, the thesis statement, and all this. And I gotta say, I had a real hard time coming up with one for this. There's not a lot of interesting facts going into this one. Not a lot's happening around the history of the boys. They were part of the studio machine, and this was just the next product that was on the conveyor belt. And this time, like Michael J. Fox, the boys are heading back in time to those bygone days of the 1890s and that long-forgotten time of the showboat, and hence the term the naughty 90s. This is another one, kind of like Whodunit and Hit the Ice. That this is, I think, one of the first ones I ever bought on VHS back in the day, and I bought it for a very specific reason, and we'll talk about that very specific reason here shortly. So this is another one that I have a great deal of nostalgia for. This is one that I really, when I rewatch it, I feel like a kid again. And of course, once again, we have to ask the question, does this hold up past the realm of nostalgia? And I'm going to say a resounding yes. I really love this one. I really love it. And I love it for a variety of reasons. And I think this is one of those things where, once again, just the formula clicked in such a way that it was new, it was fresh, it was something that we hadn't seen before and yet somehow familiar. So I just really dig this movie, and rewatching it, even with some problematic things we'll talk about here in a second, I laughed my ass off. And I've seen this movie 100 times, and I wish I had a better lead up. Later on, I'll probably be watching this video back on, I wish I did better on the lead up, but there's really not much to talk about in terms of what went before, so let's just jump right in. So what, as always, what is our scenario, and then what is our plot? Well, this time the scenario is kind of fresh, as opposed to just dropping them into a different location. A college, an army base, a haunted house, and letting the boys kind of run ragged, I should say. This one has a pretty interesting setup. It's not just let's set them to a different location, it's let's send them to a different time. So this time the boys are running wild on an old showboat floating down the Mississippi in the 1890s. The plot. So in this one, Bud is playing an actor who's been hired on this showboat called the River Queen, the showboat being run by the lovable and kindly Captain Jackson, played by Henry Travers. And I don't think you could get a better casting for a lovable, trustworthy sea captain. If you don't know the name Henry Travers, 10 to 1 you know his voice and you know his face. He's probably best known as Clarence, the angel in It's a Wonderful Life. So, already you've got, we all have some feelings about this actor, and it's a perfect casting here. So Captain Jackson has a reputation for honesty. His shows are good, clean fun. The whole family can come, that kind of thing. Well, unfortunately for Captain Jackson, a couple of, river gamblers, a little trio led by Miss Farrow. So it's interesting we have a female villain this time. She's not like a henchman. She's like the primary antagonist. Sees this riverboat and says this is like the perfect scheme. We set up some crooked gambling on board. The people come on, they empty their pockets. If the law gets wise to us, we just ship the whole thing off and swim down the river, So they decide to get Captain Jackson drunk and have him gamble basically big chunks of his boat away, so they now own part of the River Queen. So you have these crooked gamblers on one side, you've got a lovable and trustworthy captain on the other and his faithful crew, and Abbott and Costello square in the middle, trying to, of course, outwit the gamblers and save the showboat. As I said, Bud plays an actor, plays Dexter Broadhurst, which is a part I think works very well for him. I don't think people really give Bud Abbott enough credit for what a handsome gentleman he was, and he had. He wasn't Cary Grant or anything like that, but especially in these early pictures in his younger days, he was a dashing fellow. He had a lot of charm to him, and having him play kind of a big, boisterous, old-timey melodrama actor is it's like a perfect fit. It really fit his onstage persona and let him do some fun things with it. Lou just plays a random theater worker on the showboat. So he works backstage. He kind of does everything. He's basic Lou Costello, you know, a odd job kind of goofy guy they keep around because he's lovable and everybody likes him. So there you go. So what makes this movie work? I think there's a lot of things. I think number one, as I mentioned, by not just putting them in a new location, but putting them in a new time, it suddenly made the act feel very fresh. Up until this point, all of their movies had taken place in what was at the time the modern day. You could make the debate for Lost in a Harem. That one kind of had a little bit more fantasy Aladdin world to it, so it was a little bit quote unquote timeless in terms of the time period. But Bud and Lou and Marilyn Maxwell were very contemporary in that. Oh, parking pass slid down. Sorry about that, folks. Anywho, so putting them in another time, another place, again, really freshened up the act and made it feel different, especially, and it was a wise choice in my opinion, because a lot of the routines that Abbott and Costello become known for, you know, vaudeville in general, got its start from the comedy acts and musical acts and things that were done on the old showboats. So it's a natural fit. It's not like it's not anachronistic. Their comedies still fit in that time and place, and it works very, very well. I think also because this is a period piece, it feels like there is a bigger budget at work than there really is. They are ironically reusing a lot of the sets and props from the actual movie Showboat, based on the Oscar Hammerstein and Jerome Kern musical. Another link to Bud Lou and Jerome Kern. So the new costumes, the new sets, you know, even if they were reused, but you know, it just gave the film a larger scope, which I think the boys kind of deserved. I mean, these are two of the biggest box office draws. And part of the reason why that is because their films were very cheap to produce, and another reason is because their comedy lent itself to that smaller, more contained, you know, scenarios and setups. But it felt good to kind of see them in a Universal picture, feeling at least like they were part of a much bigger setup. So I just think that gives the film a different energy. And speaking of energy, I mentioned this in the Here Come the Co-Eds review, that one of the best scenes in that film is Abbott and Costello doing one of their routines with an audience, with people in the room with them and responding to them. One of the fun little things about this movie is that at several times throughout the production, there are two scenes in particular. One that takes place in a gambling hall and one that takes place during a scene we'll talk about here in a minute, where you can audibly hear crew members and extras laughing at them. And I love that. I love that you can hear that. Sometimes you really got to listen for it, but you can totally hear it. And I love that. I just think that adds a little bit more life to it. I think having a live audience wouldn't have worked, but hearing people snickering, it really gives you that breaking of the fourth wall to go, man, people were really finding this funny. And I don't know, I love that. Another thing I really love about this movie is, again, the time period. Working and being educated for the theater, as I am, theatrical history is a big thing for me. I really love knowing the evolution of theater and how it reflects different times, and American theater especially. I love the history of musical theater. And being kind of a connoisseur of, theatrical history, the Showboat era is a time that's not talked about as much in a lot of the history classes I took or that I teach. But it was a vital stepping stone in the evolution of theater and theatrical traditions in America. As I said, a lot of the things that would go on to inspire vaudeville came from the Showboat eras. And vaudeville would go on to be one of the influencing factors in the creation of the Broadway musical. So it's really neat to kind of, obviously this is not a documentary, so obviously this is not perfect history, but it is interesting, kind of in the same way Whodunit took place in a radio station, and you got to see kind of how radio shows were staged and presented and done in front of an audience. It really gives you a feel of what that type of theater was like. And personally, I just really love that. And one of the first really memorable scenes in this film is Bud doing a play. He's playing the hero in some kind of old melodrama. And Lou working backstage, making the sound effects, dropping the things down. Of course, he's making a mess of it, but it's just neat seeing kind of what the typical bill of a showboat would be, and you see a lot of examples of that. There aren't a lot of strong musical numbers in this one. They have some quick musical interludes, but again, they're not as distracting as they have been in past films because they're part of the showboat scene. And you get to see some of those things. And I love that. It does, however, bring up, and we need to talk about this, I think it's important, some of the more uncomfortable elements of this. So as I said, this is taking place during the Showboat era. And one of the big forms of entertainment during the Showboat era was the minstrel show. And for those who don't know, minstrel shows are when white and later on black performers would have to do it, when white performers would put on blackface. And there are some scenes of blackface in this movie. And it's always wrong. It's never right. And it's inexcusable. It's a very wrong thing. So I'm not trying to offer justification, so please understand that. I am trying to offer explanation for why it's there. Lucky thing in both cases, it happens twice in this film. Luckily, in both cases, it's a very quick thing. This is not like Holiday Inn, where it's part of a big musical number. It's not like the end of the musical number in A Day at the Races, where the Marx Brothers put on blackface. It's a very quick thing. They show a dance troupe real quick, and at the very end, they're showing the very end of a production of Uncle Tom's Cabin, which in itself is very problematic. For a lot of reasons, but it was the most popular play in America at that time, in the 1890s. So the good, during that, you can see some actors clearly in blackface, and it is very uncomfortable, especially since it's supposed to be the end of the movie and everyone's happy. You're looking at it going, oh, please get the camera. Oh no, bad. The only thing I will say, and again, not a justification, just an explanation, is that, again, the film takes place in the 1890s, and minstrel shows were a popular form of entertainment. It's wrong. I'm not making a case that, just get off it. Let's just, don't be so serious, blah, 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 blah. I'm not saying that. I'm saying you're doing a period piece that was part of the period. It's bad, but it's history. Again, this isn't a documentary, so I don't know how well that explanation holds up. But, you know, what I'm basically getting at is that, yes, it's wrong. Yes, it's uncomfortable. In terms of where this falls in the offensive scale of older movies, I rate it pretty low. It's uncomfortable when it happens, but it's over very quickly, and it's in the background of one other thing, and it is historically accurate. But it's still, it makes your skin crawl. It really does. So I needed to bring that up, that it is in there, and it is part of the film. So that being said, and that being true, the rest of the film, a lot of it is just very funny, and a lot of it works so well. But all right, let's get to the main event. Literally the main event. So this film has a particularly important place in the Abbott and Costello film canon. It is really important, and it's important for one scene, and this scene happens right where it should, right in the middle. It is the scene, I won't say the movie is built around this scene, but it is kind of the centerpiece and the jewel. It is the big routine. They do a couple of routines in this, a couple of their old standards. There's the bit where Lou is trying out for the show, and he's singing, and Bud is arranging a backdrop while Lou is singing. So Bud is giving instructions to the stage crew to lift it up a little higher, down a little lower, and Lou thinks he's giving him instructions on how to sing, so he's going up and down, and, you know, it's very funny, very funny. A couple of their other little routines are in this, but what happens in the middle of this movie is not a routine. It is the routine. It is the Abbott and Costello hallmark. It is the thing they are known for. And it happens full force in this film, right in the center. Bud and Lou do Who's On First. If you've never seen this routine, you need to. And let me give you a piece of advice. I looked online, and there are a lot, I love reaction videos. You know, people react to this and react to that. And I liked watching the ones for, you know, people react to Who's On First. But they always show them the one they do for their live show, which in my personal opinion is one of the worst renditions of it. Whereas this rendition of Who's On First is one of the best. You want the absolute best, you got to look at their radio show. The episode where Lou is going to fill in for Joe DiMaggio, and the whole episode is built around them doing Who's On First. That is the absolute best rendition of it. I think this one here is the best filmed. All right, I cannot review this routine. I can't express in words the brilliance of this routine. It is a masterclass of comic timing. It is a masterclass of acting is reacting. It is just a masterclass of comedy. It doesn't matter that the logic of the routine doesn't make sense. These two guys buy into it wholeheartedly, and it is miraculous. There is a reason why this routine is considered one of the greatest comic bits ever done. There's a reason why a gold record of this routine hangs in the Baseball Hall of Fame. There's a reason why, even if people have never heard of Abbott and Costello, they most likely know Who's On First. And I think they had done a version of it in One Night in the Tropics, but it was an abbreviated, cut down, bastardized version. And one of the hard things I have about watching One Night in the Tropics, aside from the fact it's not very good, except for the parts Bud and Lou is in, is watching this crown jewel of comedy being, butchered. And that's not their fault. It's because it's shoved into a short scene in the subplot of someone else's movie. No. Who's On First deserves the treatment it got in this movie. It is center stage. It is the middle of the movie. It is what you came to see, and they do not disappoint. It is one of the best renditions of this routine I have ever seen. I love it. And I know this routine front, back, and sideways. My best friend Matt and I used to perform this routine. I'm not saying we were as good as them, but I'm saying I could do a one-man version of this right now if I really wanted to. Maybe if people want to, say so, and I'll whip it out. I'll do it. I'm not gonna do it now. So I know this routine. What I'm getting at is I've memorized this routine. I know this routine. And even with all that, I still laugh my ass off at this performance of it. That's how good it is. So if you ever want to see an Abbott and Costello and know what all the hubbub is about, I've given you some recommendations for other films to view, but you want to see why they were considered the kings of comedy, watch this routine. Watch this movie, watch this routine. Yeah, I love it. I love it to death. It's flawless. Also, a couple other quick things about this film. I also have to say before we close out that it does have one of the best ending chase scenes, where the crooked gambler's henchmen are chasing Bud and Lou around the showboat. Again, I normally don't like the end chase scene, but this one's confined. It's on the showboat, so there's no crazy stunts or, driving all over the place. It's very contained, and I think that helps it out a lot. So I do like the end chase scene in this one. Not all of it works. There's a bit, they do a mirror bit in this one, which doesn't work very well, in my opinion. There's just too many things that, Lou pretends to be the mirror for the big gambler, played by Joe Sawyer, who was one of their heavies in Hit the Ice previously. And it doesn't work because there's no way he could confuse himself for Lou Costello. I think they tried to put in a thing that he was a heavy drinker, and so that may have been why. But it just doesn't work. That's the only part of this movie that doesn't work. The rest of it, the costumes, the setting, the comedy, it's good. And I really, really love this one. And I was very happy to revisit it yet again. So there we are. That is the Naughty 90s. So join us next time when we travel back to MGM. And Bud and Lou are finally allowed to wreak havoc in the place they have pretty much been ruling for the past several years, when Bud and Lou go to Hollywood. So until next time, thank you so much for joining me, and as always, drive safe, and I'll see you at the movies.